Using functions. Having informally used a discussed function, it is time to formalize a few concepts. A function call is the act of using a function by referring to its name, followed by parentheses. A synonymous term is function invocation. Know these two terms is important. Function call, function invocation. So when I use these terms, know that they mean the same thing. And we will sometimes say that we are invoking a function. You probably hear me say this more, invoking a function or invoking the function or function call. Remember these terms. Within parentheses, a comma separated list of arguments. I definitely gotta explain this to you because this is going to confuse you. May be provided when calling a function. These are sometimes called inputs, and we say that the inputs are passed to the function. All right, know that these two are similar. So if you hear arguments, you know we're talking about inputs. When we say inputs, you know we're talking about arguments. Now here's a generic function call looks like. Notice what I just said. A function call. We're doing a function call. This is how you call a function. You give it the name, whatever the name of the function is that you created, and these are the arguments. The reason why I say I gotta explain this to you and why this is going to be confusing, because you're going to have to know the difference between an argument and a parameter. They both go within the parentheses. And so I'm going to show you how to tell the difference. And when you are dealing with parameters versus when you're dealing with arguments. But understand, when you're dealing with arguments, you're doing a function call or invoking the function. And it's an input. So I'll explain the difference in the next section. But I'm going to go over it a little bit now when I give you some examples. Every function provides a return value. Notice what that says. Every function provides a return value, which can be used by calling program, for example, to store in a variable or print to the console. A return value may be stored in a variable like such, right here. And what this is, this is what we did here. We're declaring and initializing a variable using the string function. So we're turning this number into a string. It may also be used in other ways. For example, here we use the return value as the input argument to console.log without storing it. Pay attention. So here we go, console.log string number 42. So it's a string. We know that it converted it to a string. Don't depend on because it's white and we say that strings are white in the console. It depends on the console. Every console is different. But normally if it's white, if you're used to your console, it may be white, and if it was a number, it would be red. But don't depend on that. If a function doesn't provide an explicit return value, the special value undefined will be returned. Pay attention. Here we go. What did we do here? We declared and initialized the variable return value with console.log LaunchCOde, and then we have return value. Why did we get an undefined? Because console.log doesn't have a return in it. And so therefore this return value is just a variable holding console.log. But when I try to go in console.log it out by itself, I'm not getting a return. So this is why when we are in our console, you see that undefined is because when they did the console.log for that variable, there is console.log doesn't have a return. Now the special value undefined is built into JavaScript as with Booleans. It is not a string, so undefined strictly equal to a string undefined returns false. In some cases, calling a function results in an action that changes the state of a program outside of the function itself. Such a behavior is known as a side effect. Now, before we go further, I need to help you understand what side effect is. This is a term that you see that is bolded, so we want you to know what it is. But I need to give you an example to show you so I can hit home to what a side effect is. Now, the opposite of a side effect is a pure function. So pure functions don't have side effects. If the function has a side effect, then that means that function is dependent on an external value. That's the difference between a pure function and a function that has side effects. So let's look at this for a second before we move forward. So I'm going to go over here, open up my inspect tool, go to the console. Let me clear that out, and let me show you what a pure function looks like. So here, now I'm going to go over the syntax later on, and we're going to show you. So let's say I want to create a function called sum two numbers. Right here, two numbers. And inside that function, I want to pass in, this is where the parameter goes. And how do I know the difference when it's a parameter versus an argument? This keyword function. When you put the keyword function out there, anything in these parentheses are parameters. So I want to be descriptive instead of just doing A and B. I'm going to say num1 because I want numbers. So num1, num2, and now I am going to close that off. And then I'm going to put inside of here, and I'm using shift enter, and in this function I want to sum two numbers together. So I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to call it sum total. And so I'm going to do what? I want to put my logic in here. What do I want to do? I want to add num1 and num2. Now, pay attention and remember the rules. Anything with the plus sign, and remember, parameters are variables. Notice that I did not have to declare them. They're already declared here as parameters. I know I want numbers because we know in JavaScript is dynamic. These variables can mean anything. These parameters can be anything. All a parameter is a placeholder. And so here I name it num1 because I want numbers, because this plus sign does double duty. If I put a string as an argument, when I pass the argument, it's going to concatenate these. Instead of adding them, I need two numbers. So this is why I'm creating the sum total. I want to be able to store, what are these called? Expressions inside this variable. Now, in a function, it has to have a return. So what am I returning? I want to return sum total because that's what's holding the logic. Now, like I said, when we invoke a function, you have to call the name of the function, which is sum two numbers with parentheses. Now, this is where I give it arguments. So I'm going to give it the number 2 and the number 4. Now, my logic is to add these two together. Here in the parameter, I have num1, num2. I'm giving two arguments. You have to give the two arguments. That's what it's looking for. I hit enter, I get the number 6. A pure function is always going to give whatever the input is, it's going to give me the exact same output every time. No side effects. That's what a pure function is. So 2 and 4, every time I put 2 and 4 in, it's going to give me the number 6. No matter what, it's not going to change because it's not dependent on anything external from this function. But now let me show you a function with side effects. So let me create another variable, called this onum. And the onum, I'm going to assign it the number 6. So this is dependent right here. So now I'm going to create a function. And I'm going to call this function new data. And I need to pass it a parameter in here, and I'm going to call it new value. So I'm going to close that off. And in this new value, I need I need to store this into something. So I'm going to call it let update. And I'm going to pass it in that old num, and I spell old wrong. So I got to spell it the way I have it on because that's a different variable. And I'm going to add a plus here with new value. So now I'm adding those two together. So I have to return something because functions have to have a return. So I need to return update. Now, once I've got that done, now I want to invoke the function new, what did I call this function? New data. I have to have parentheses. I'm gonna this is what we call boilerplate. Now I need to pass in the argument. I'm gonna say 50. So here, update this old num. I gotta put num. I didn't spell it right, so I gotta put num in here. So old num plus new value. So I'm gonna take this old num plus new value, and it should be 56 when I hit enter. There you go. Now, why do we say that this have side effects? Because if I go here and I change num 6 to 16, hit enter, and then I want to run that same number 50 is what I passed as an argument, I get a different output. So the input is still the same, but the output is different. That's what a side effect is, a function for side effects. You're going to use this a lot in your programming career, side effects, because you're going to be using external information, external data, like manipulating data, or you're going to be needing to fetch a API or do a HTTP request. Those type of functions they use is that external information is what we call a function with side effects. So you have a pure function that it doesn't depend on anything outside of it in order for it to work, and it's going to give you the same output with the same input. So whatever you input, you're going to get the exact same output. So I just want to touch that on that a little bit. This is a high level. I'm just planting the seed because later on we're going to go reinforce it. We're going to reinforce it. So I know when you see this word side effects, you're not going to know what it means, and you're not going to really dig deep into it. That's why I needed to point that out. So that's the end of this video. I'm going to see you on the next one. But remember, the more you do, the more you improve.